Hi, it's Hamilton McIntyre at Electric Scotland. This is the newsletter video that I've just started doing. I did the first one last week. This is for the 2nd of June 2017. So without further ado, here's what's in it this week. Firstly, I'm starting off by giving you a little feedback on the last one because it only got 56 views and a couple of comments, so you could say that was not very successful, but I decided to keep it running for a few weeks and see whether it develops or not. The topic this week is talking about the first time America freaked out over automation. I'm bringing you a couple of links on this. One, to read an old 1950s report on the problems of automation in America and how it could lose thousands of American jobs. And it cites quite a lot of interesting information on that. But following on with that, there's been a lot of talk generally in the press about over the next 10 to 20 years, a lot more jobs could go due to automation. And so I think that's where the basic universal income discussions are highly relevant. And I put a link to discussions on that. So between reading the article and reading the more up-to-date information, hopefully that'll give you some ideas and help you prepare for the future. When it comes to the news feeds, I just want to remind you that there's maybe, while I'm featuring what I consider to be interesting news during the week in the newsletter, I've actually got maybe 5 times these amount of news stories on the Scott news feed on the website. But I'm not bringing you, there's tons of political stories about the elections and all that going on. I haven't really touched on that much in the newsletter, but certainly on the news feed I've done a lot more on that. So just to remind you that out of all the news I put up during the week in the news feed, I've selected just some stories from it to go into the newsletter. So without further ado, here's the summary of the stories that I've got this week. The first story is Moray constituency radio debate. It's about a 50-minute debate, that one. And I just thought Moray is actually the one constituency in Scotland that almost voted to leave. Now, bearing in mind everyone wanted to remain in the EU, but I think Moray was like 51% decided to remain. So it was almost the only constituency that voted to leave. And this, of course, is a very major fishing constituency, and the fishermen are very unhappy. So I thought, that I haven't brought you anything like this before. And I thought, well, this would be, if you want to really get an understanding of what's going on in the election, that particular talk might be quite useful to listen to. The next story is, when will the sun go down on Scottish wind turbines? Again, this is a story from Think Scotland. And it's really making a kind of case for why wind turbines perhaps aren't the best way forward. And of course, as you know, last week I brought you the discussion on thorium, which shows a way that we could have green energy at a much lesser cost. And bearing in mind that most wind turbines, the actual hardware is being imported into Scotland. So we're not actually making them, and we're not really cracking on with all the new technology that's mostly coming from outside Scotland. That's not good for Scotland, and I think we need to re-look at it, and this is perhaps a good article which could make you think about that. The next one is the German economy thrives at the expense of other EU states. Because of the discussions about Merkel saying she doesn't trust the USA or the UK and that Europe must get stronger together, I thought this would be an interesting article for you to read and consider. So that's why that one's there. I also found another article about the Scots who pioneered photography, so I thought that would be a good one for you. Then Britain's great explorations are now online, and I thought again that would be useful for anyone who's interested in history. Then I've got Carnoustie primary pupils, a big effort for small blue butterfly. Well, obviously it's a nature article, but I think it's rather good because obviously Scots kids, are obviously doing something important there, and I think it's a nice wee story. Next one is, who knew the Scots were such space pioneers? And again, that's a story because you don't often hear about talking about space in Scotland in the same breath, and it's perhaps rather revealing what we are doing in Scotland on that front. So again, I thought that would make a good article. Also, Scotland's surf city. That's basically it's a plan to build a huge surfing area in Edinburgh, and so it's an interesting kind of concept, that. So I thought again I'd bring you that one. And then another thinking article, which is social care in family affair, is a family affair. And again, it's because social care is very expensive, and I think it needs looking at. That's not to say that we want to change it, or we do want to change it, or can we fund it, or can we not fund it. I think there's a lot more in this area that we need to think about. And again, I thought if you read that article, that maybe will start you thinking and maybe researching and thinking about how we could do better. Next one is, who has power over what in Scotland? Well, I've been asked over a number of years about what Scotland has power over and how much it costs and all that. I thought, well, that would be it seemed to me like a good article that explains how things work in Scotland. Then I read this article about graphene sieve could make seawater drinkable. And I kind of thought, well, it's not particularly a Scottish story, but I thought to myself, well, you can't drink seawater, you go mad. So I thought to myself, hey, if you're out in a boat or something like that, and you run out of water or something, then if you've got a little graphene sieve there, that you can get drinking water. And I also remember being brought up in Kuwait. I think Kuwait had the 3 largest water distillation plants in the world at that time. And this makes it a lot cheaper to do these desalination plants. So I thought that would be interesting. Then I've got why Nicola Sturgeon is wrong about her mandate. This is from the Scottish Review. And the reason I've included that is that it's the first time I've really read a really good analysis of where the votes are for the SNP. And it does seem that there's a gradual falling off now. I mean, we think the SNP has peaked in Scotland and it's starting to go back. Well, basically in that particular article, it tells you the results of the elections, the last 3 elections, and shows you how the SNP vote is in fact sliding away. So I thought that would be interesting. And then the final story is Donald Trump is right about Germany. And that's, basically his diagnosis is imprecise, but Merkel's economic policies really are hurting the US. So again, I thought that would be interesting because obviously she's also lumped the UK and Brexit into that. So these are the kind of stories I thought would be of interest for you this week. Then under the Electric Canadian section, we've got Andrew Scheer wins Conservative leadership. Well, if you're interested in Canada at all, obviously, in theory, he could be the next Prime Minister of Canada if the Conservatives win in the next election. So I thought you should at least know a little bit about him, and that's why I put that story in. A historical sketch of the British American Assurance Company. I've always had an industrial section on the site. I think it's good to understand how big companies like that, started. So that's why that's there. And I've also found a very good site about Scottish Canadians. It was really, I thought it was an excellent article, and there's tons of links within that, so you can go and find out more about the people involved. And I really thought it was excellent, so I put a link to that site from within that. And there's one story from Conrad Black this week. It's about as Madoff victims go unpaid, Richard Breeden has been unmasked for what he is. So there's a link to that story. Then on to Electric Scotland itself, the Falford Directory Yearbook. I put up another one for this time for 1907. And again, I've given you a couple of wee stories from it. I will give you one, just as a domestic compromise, which I thought was amusing. And it's not often that domestic compromises are as happily arranged as one in which Abraham Lincoln, the famous American president, played a leading part. It says one day the president was unusually distraught. There had been a little domestic wrangle over the colour of a wallpaper. Mrs. Lincoln was determined to have yellow. The president was equally strong on green. The next morning he was quite cheerful, and the secretary said he supposed the affair had been settled to his satisfaction. "Oh yes," said Lincoln, "we've made a compromise. It's going to be yellow." I just thought that was fun. And there's another wee going about easygoing journalism in there. Then we've got a documentary from Kilmarnock in Scotland. I just happened to, I was searching for something else entirely, and this one came up as an option, and I thought, I wonder what that is, and I clicked the link. And it's obviously about the other side of Scotland, the side that's drugs and low pay, unemployment and everything. And it's apparently a 5 or 6 part series. And I happened to look at part 5 of it. It's about half an hour in length. And it certainly made me think. And I will say it's quite difficult to understand this speech because it's obviously quite broad Glaswegian, as it were. So you have to maybe listen carefully to try to understand what they're saying. But I don't know, it's certainly part of the social scene in Scotland, and it's a part that we can't be proud of, but we need to fix it. So I thought, well, I'll put that in because I think maybe you should look at it at least. Then I've got an article about Inverness in the 15th century. It's because I've already got a book up about Inverness in the 16th century, but I hadn't got anything in the 15th century, which is the 1400s, of course. So I thought that would be great to add to the site, and especially for those that are interested in the Inverness area of Scotland, the Highlands. And then we got in section 1 of the June 2017 issue of Beth's Newfangled Family Tree. And if you don't know about Beth's Newfangled Family Tree, it's essentially a Scots-American publication, although people view it from all over the world. And then there she gives us a lot of what's going on, the Highland Games and clan affairs and all kinds of interesting things. So it's always a great read. And she usually produces section 1 and section 2. For some reason she always does section 2 first, and then towards the end of the month you'll get section 1. So this is section 1. And then I have another book on a place. It's Tranent and its surroundings, historical, ecclesiastical and traditional. This is the 2nd edition, and to that one he's added a lot more information. Now we already have a book up about Tranent, but I thought to myself when I was reading it, this extends the knowledge quite a bit, and I felt it was a very good read, so I decided to add that to the site. And then I put up a little article about Sir Alexander Glenn. He was an Arctic explorer and wartime intelligence officer before going into the shipping industry and eventually becoming chairman of the British Tourist Authority. Again, he's a Scot, so I thought, well, it's not a long one, but it's taken from an obituary, and I thought to myself, that's interesting. It'd be nice to know more about him. Then we've got Traditional Tales of the English and Scottish Pheasantry. This is by Alan Cunningham. And as it happened, he spent many years there in England, but his stories are quite old, and these stories he's got are from the olden days that the peasants, told each other, and so there's an oral tradition there, and he spent a lot of time up in the borders of Scotland, so he heard those tales from his parents, grandparents and people in the area, and he's basically pulled together this little collection of stories from those times. So again, I thought that was kind of interesting. Then I have another article which is Reasons for Scots Moving to England. And this is some research I was doing, and I was very pleased to get some people at the Scottish Records Office to give me some additional information. And so, I mean, I think I quoted like something like 700,000 Scots that are living and working in England today. And I'm, of course, naturally thinking, well, why did they all go there? Well, this kind of article will give you the rationale behind everything. And then the final book I put up this week was Looking for Nuns. And part of this came from last week when I was telling you about the some of the work of one of our researchers on medieval convents. This is a prosopographical study of Scottish nuns in the late Middle Ages by Kim Curran. I've actually, at the top I told you what prosopography is so that you can understand it, because I didn't know what it was, I have to say, I had to look it up. So I've got you that, and I've got a little link how to get more information and guide on the use of that term in historical research. So again, and there's a link to the book as well, to the article. And then the big story this week is got me going because of the German Chancellor saying she distrusted the UK and the USA. It just made me think, you know, that in history times, Scotland's had great dealings with Germany and France, and so has Britain, of course. And I thought to myself, you know, I'll create an article this time around. So this is my story, and I've pulled together stuff from around the site, little quotes from one article, quotes from another, giving you a few links throughout it so you can learn more. But essentially, I'm saying here that one has to remember that it wasn't that long ago, like the Second World War, and we still have people living that were participating in that war, that we ended up with France being defeated by Germany, and how Vichy France was created, which was authoritarian and very much under German control. And basically on that side of things, they seem to be very happy working with Germans, the Vichy side of France. No, it's not all of France, it's part of France. But the thing is that in the EU today, with Germany and with the new Prime Minister of France seeming to be wanting to get closer ties together, that kind of reminded me of the Vichy France thing. And I thought to myself, you know, we should try and look at the history of the connections with those countries. And so I've told you a bit about the old alliance, how it started, but how in actual fact in the longer term that didn't do much for Scotland. In fact, it caused Scotland a lot of issues and problems. And so I'm telling you a little bit about that story and giving you links to read a lot more about it. And then I'm going through the First World War, because after all, Germany started the First World War, and it was first to invent poisonous gas on the battlefield, which was horrendous. And then on to the Second World War, what happened there. And then I've even talked about the repercussions from all of that, because I mean, the US comes into play, New York and Washington, because at that time people in America were more favouring the German side of things rather than the British side of things. So that just goes to show that there were problem areas there which had to be overcome. So I've given you a bit of that history as well for you to read. And of course, to get from Germany to get into France, they had to go through Belgium and the Netherlands. And I do have quite a lot of information about the old Scottish ties with the Netherlands, and giving you a link if you wish to read more about that. And then, of course, I'm also talking within the story, towards the end of the story, about how Germany has benefited enormously with being in control of the EU, because while it's 27 states, Germany's the biggie. And you go against Germany, and you ain't got a leg to stand on there. But it's basically saying that I mean, essentially, it's the fact that you can say 10 to 20%, because Germany uses the euro, which is 10 to 20% below what the value of their own currency was if they still had the Deutschmark. So that means that their exports are much, I mean, they're huge, basically. So I've given you a little story about that, because their surplus effect is like 300 billion. It's the largest in the world. So they're not daft, that's for sure, the Germans. But I've mainly made the case that, is this Germany with Vichy France, is this the attempt to win a third world war or something, but this time economically rather than through battle, as it were? So I'm just chucking some stuff up there. You can either accept it or reject it, or make you want to read more about it or study it, because at the end of the day, Scotland's connections throughout the EU, a lot of the members there, Scotland's done great work for a lot of people, but we haven't been recompensed for any of that, really, at the end of the day. So that's the newsletter, and of course below this video you'll get a link. If you click it, you'll go directly to a PDF version of the newsletter on the site, and from that, if you're interested in any of these stories at all, you click on the links and you can read as much or as little as you want. So hopefully that's given you an insight into this week's newsletter, and I hope you enjoy it. And as always, please get back to me with any comments. Thanks, bye.